to summarise the key points, and then we can consider our conclusions and recommendations. All scrutiny committees will be meeting in the next few days, as you're well aware. Conclusions for Cabinet's consideration. So I'll now hand over to Meryl. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to run, obviously you've had a lot of questions and answers today, and some of those you'll be satisfied with. And I'll attempt to go through the points that we've picked up on to see if you wish to make a recommendation. The first one I've got is Councillor Ross Penhale-Thomas asked about the increase in fly-tipped rubbish, and Councillor Bletto expanded on that, and the false economy comment on removal of the waste enforcement team. You may be aware, as you're on BREP, there's already a recommendation on this. The panel considered the proposed removal of the waste enforcement team would be counterproductive and lead to increased costs in the areas of waste and fly-tipped waste removal. The panel recommended that alternatives to a complete removal of the team be explored and supported the proposal of possibly merging teams to provide a reduced service rather than a complete removal of the waste enforcement team. And whether you wanted to add to that or make an additional recommendation from this committee. Is Councillor Thomas still on?
I think Councillor Penhale-Thomas might have dropped off the meeting, has he? Was it Councillor Bledsoe that raised this issue as
Councillor
well?
Bledsoe also raised it, yes.
Councillor Bledsoe?
I think, sorry, just Chair,
Yes,
clarification.
Oh.
I think one of the councillors was mentioning more than just the waste enforcement team. They were talking about the other, I think it was Councillor Thomas was talking about the other, two other reductions, wasn't he, as well?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, what were the reductions? They were Strategic Regeneration Fund, weren't they, on a number of...
No, it was the fly-tipped rubbish, cutting waste,
commercial waste, is it? And
the cutting of waste management, wasn't it?
No, it sort of builds upon my point, doesn't it, Meryl, about, as Councillor Bledsoe mentioned, the false economy of removing some services and potentially requiring statutory intervention after that. So I think careful consideration needs to be given by Cabinet as to the implications of removing some services and therefore the need for statutory intervention going forward. So as long as they're cognizant of that, I think that would be a recommendation which I would present corporate-wide, not necessarily just exclusively relating to the services which have been highlighted by Councillor Bledsoe and Councillor Penhale-Thomas, but in other areas as well. Whilst discretionary services inevitably have to be looked at, because we're now in a situation whereby, whilst they may be desirable, as I said, there's a necessity to look at them because of the extreme situation which we're in as far as the budget is concerned, to ensure that we set a balanced budget. But nevertheless, as Councillor Gebbie and others have mentioned, there is merit in providing discretionary services, but there needs to be a balance to ensure that statutory intervention, which will cost more in the long run, isn't a factor. So perhaps you can sum that up in a more succinct way than I did, but that is something which, off the top of my head, could sum up what has been discussed with regards to just discretionary and statutory services.
So can I just ask if the committee wishes to make a recommendation on that point then, Chair, as you've, obviously we can come back, we can email out the wording after the meeting on that point, just to make sure everyone's in agreement.
Councillor Williams.
I think we seem to have lost half the committee. With what Councillor Alex Williams has just said. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. What I would say is just, in summary of what I just said, it's a recommendation to Cabinet that they consider the impact of the removal of discretionary services and the impact that that may have on the need for statutory intervention in the future. Simple as that, really. Hope you captured that, Meryl. Over to you again.
Thank you, Chair. Then we talked about the national legislative commitments to be fully funded, and some of you will remember there was a BREF recommendation on this that Cabinet raised with Welsh Government, the panel's expectation that all national legislative commitments must be fully funded to allow the Council to have the capacity to deliver them in an efficient manner. Whether you wanted to make any additional points from this committee?
I think from my perspective, Meryl, we can add weight to what the Cabinet have already done in lobbying both Welsh Government, UK Government and others to ensure that any national legislative commitments are fully funded by central government to ensure that our hard-pressed revenue support grant isn't affected by national policy changes. That was the recommendation which came out of BREP, and we reiterated that in the public domain today. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, I'd second them comments, Chair. That it's. I think I commented on this in BREP. I think, but it's definitely the dictats coming from other bodies need to be funded, or we can't be expected to find that from the RSG. As I said, Chair, I tried to second them. We get that, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Davis. Yes, yeah, I've got that loud and clear. Thank you very much, indeed.
Thank you. Cheers.
Please do say if you're not in agreement, by the way, with any of these recommendations, because we obviously want to reflect unanimity in our recommendations. But I'll pass back to Meryl now to see what else she's captured from our meeting.
So there was a point raised by Councillor Amanda Williams about the construction of a footpath to avoid education paying for buses. It was specific to that ward, but did the committee want to make a larger recommendation and that more consideration be given to more joined up thinking across directorates, bear in mind the chief's definition of one council? And Councillor Williams also talked about, sorry, do you want to deal with that one first and then we'll go to the next one? Is there a recommendation there really about more consideration be given to joined up thinking across directorates, the one council approach?
Councillor Bledsoe, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd certainly support that because in the same way that Councillor Williams has an issue with footpaths and active travel routes to school, so do we in our ward as well. So it is something that affects across quite a few wards, not just one singular ward. But again, it's across many parts of the directorate as well. So I'd like to see that as well. Yes, please.
Just building upon that, I'll bring in Councillor Williams in a moment, but on a more holistic point, and it goes back to what I was saying regarding other council-wide services, and I suppose supporting what the Chief Executive said about organisational change. It's about ensuring that we do have some more collaboration both within our local authority and with other partners. You know, as I mentioned in my remarks on other council-wide services, you know, we often see our organisation operating within different silos because of the fact that we're such a large organisation, and organisational change is very difficult to achieve in a sort of monolithic organisation such as this council. So we need to ensure, as I mentioned in my remarks, that we do work and genuinely achieve a one council approach rather than it simply being a catchphrase. And I'm sure, as Mark Shepherd mentioned, that will be encapsulated by the new corporate plan, which is due to come before us in due course. Councillor Amanda Williams.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to say that mine
echoing again, I don't know why. That mine was for the fact that I've raised this now for 5 years and we're still no further down the line and it hasn't even been looked at, which is where my issue was. Yes, it might not be achievable and the cost might be too high, but when we're not even looking at recommendations that we're giving and then we're having to repeat it, it could be that it's a no-goer, but we need to be having these conversations, and where us as elected members are raising things that we have concerns with, that there isn't a one council approach, then I think we need to be also taken seriously, so that otherwise we'll just keep repeating the same questions year on year with no progress. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. I think you've captured that, Meryl, so I'll go back to you for any further recommendations.
To make sure everyone's on board with anything that's being said, or they raise their hand and say otherwise. Sorry, the next thing I've identified is Councillor Williams made a point about the majority, the responses to budget consultation, because there'd been a high proportion of people against a rise to council tax, and how the respondents would have confidence that the council's listening to them. This links to a BREP recommendation that's been made in light of the majority of responses to the public budget consultation, indicating that respondents supported council tax remaining the same. A response be provided to respondents who engage to ensure they understand the rationale behind the budget and the reason for decisions taken, to ensure they feel that their views are valued and have been taken into consideration. Is there anything additional that members want to raise there? I think actually before we pause there was another point raised about how we communicate to residents on where the money is funded through council tax itself, whereas there's probably a misinterpretation of that out there. And there is a BREP recommendation that it was essential that public be informed of the proposed increased level of council tax as soon as possible, with clear reasons and rationale for the increase. So whether you want to add to that or make an additional point from this committee.
Well, from my perspective, Meryl, I think that summarises our conclusions from BREP and this committee perfectly. I don't know whether anyone else has anything to add, so I'll move that is a recommendation from the committee. Someone prepared to second, or any differences of opinion?
No, I'm happy to second.
Thanks very much, Councillor Williams. Meryl?
Thanks. So, Councillor Betts asked about the reliance of social services wellbeing on short-term grant funding. There was an answer provided, but we didn't have the value of short-term grant funding. Do we want to request this information, basically, arising from this meeting?
Yes, I think that would be a legitimate question to ask, so we're in receipt of it by the next time we meet.
The next point then, Councillor Good talked about discussions regarding support for hosts and of Ukrainian guests, and bringing that back after those discussions. So again, we could just put that forward as a request or an acknowledgement of that. There was a request for the MTFS contingency reserve figure. That's been emailed to us since now. So that's it currently stands at £906,000, and there hasn't been any drawdown this year. So we can circulate that as well for members who have left, but that's the response on that one. Whether you want to mention that as a request from this committee, but obviously we've met it now as well. Sorry, Meryl. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. From my perspective, that's interesting, isn't it? And there hasn't been a drawdown this year. I think there's scope, I suppose, at our next meeting to probe
whether we ought to look at using or drawing down on that particular reserve. Now, I'm cognizant of what Carys mentioned to Councillor Penhill-Thomas's question and others about using other reserves because they can only be used for one-off issues or mainly on capital funding rather than to support revenue support grants. But perhaps the committee would like to give some thought to where it would draw down money from that MTFS contingency reserve to perhaps shore up some of the services which the Cabinet are proposing to cut during the MTFS period. So I suppose that's a question for the next committee meeting, and we can pose that question to the finance team then, but I just plant that seed within members' minds. Anything else, Meryl, you picked out?
Sorry, Chair, I think I was just going to come in there. One of your queries and questions was, well, there's a couple in relation to the, you'd requested the breakdown per cost centre to come to COSC on the 31st of January when we next meet. And you'd also asked for an explanatory note on what corporate directors in each directorate, whether any significant variances within the year. And I think you also asked that also come to the 31st of January. The Chief acknowledged that you have asked for this consistently and gave commitment that they would be able to provide some additional information to follow in BREP in the next year. Future BREP. Specifically, the full budget book breakdown to include all the various options being considered by Cabinet, greater narrative by cost centre, information about discretionary and statutory services, and a cost breakdown on what is statutory and what is discretionary, and the impact of any potential budget reductions on each. And we also, or rather, BREP expressed concerns over the high risk of deliverability of the proposed budget reductions, given the risk status of the majority of the proposals were marked red. The panel would have liked more narrative from corporate directors or officers setting out how they were to achieve the proposed reductions, and recommended that this information be provided to future meetings of BREP. So it's just whether this committee wants to make any recommendations about information to be requested to COSC on the 31st of January.
Okay, from my perspective, Jess, thanks for that. I reiterated my request in this meeting of what I previously described and you've eloquently summarised from BREP. I acknowledge what the Chief Executive and Chief Financial Officer have said about the viability of doing that within this financial year. So the vast majority of those recommendations are for future financial years. However, what I feel that can be provided by our next meeting on the 31st is any significant variances which the different corporate directors feel will be the case in the forthcoming budget year of 23-24 due to whatever reasons, and they can provide that narrative on the significant variances. I don't think the committee would be interested in 10,000 here or there. I think they'd be interested, for example, I picked out one from rapid rehousing services, which went up from 60,000 to 395,000. And of course, there's a budget pressure within the Chief Executive's Directorate, which he's allocated £700,000 to for the forthcoming year. If there are any other instances of that where there's going to be a significant pressure, I think it's possible for the different corporate directors to provide that budget narrative and to provide what they feel will be significant variances, whether that be up or down, so that we have more of a sight on where the significant budget pressures are. For going forward, I think we can take the other recommendations from BREP and take that up with Carys and Deb, and they've been very amenable to doing that. Just on the other point you make, I think and please, if other committee members don't feel that it's appropriate, please raise your hand. But I think that it's imperative that the Cabinet consider the deliverability of some of the proposals within their current budget. Now, I think I and others were concerned that many of the proposals haven't been fully thought through, haven't been developed, rather, and 88% are currently listed as red, 8% are listed as amber, and only 4% are listed as green. Now, this surely must raise alarm bells, and we need to be mindful of the implication of that on setting a balanced budget. Now, the leader did mention that, and I acknowledge this, that it's a fluid document. Budget can be revised where necessary, where budget pressures cannot be met, or budget reduction proposals cannot be met. But given the fact that such a large figure is attributed to the Education Directorate, and in particular schools' delegated budgets, then it would be, I think, appropriate for this committee to recommend that the Cabinet flesh out in more detail how they're going to deliver it, and what the impact that a reduction of 2% on schools' delegated budgets and then a 1% reduction every year thereafter for the duration of the MTFS period, what impact that would have on individual schools, and whether it would push any other individual schools into a deficit position. So that was a long-winded answer to your question, but I hope you've grasped my thinking around those three elements: the variances within 23-24, the BREP recommendation whereby we have more information on the workings out, I called it, didn't I? Not just the answer by cost centre within each different directorate, which is impossible to receive this year. I acknowledge that, but we can receive in future years. And then I think one of the principal recommendations which needs to come out of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee is the necessity for the budget reduction proposals to have a better deliverability risk status than 88% being in the red category. Okay, Councillor Amanda Williams.
Thanks. I just wanted to support that final point because I raised the questions in education and my concerns about the 2% and how achievable it was. Now, my questions weren't answered today because the relevant individuals weren't at the meeting. So I'm hoping they will be answered when we do have the meeting. But I think it is important that we note from this committee our concern. Cut for schools is a significant sum of money, and we're told we have to not achievable, then there's going to be a significant shortfall. So I totally agree with what you're saying. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. Of course, we'll have the opportunity to discuss this in more detail, and members ought to be reminded as well that at our meeting on the 31st, we will receive the recommendations of all of the different scrutiny committees for our consideration. So whilst we have jurisdiction of scrutiny over the Chief Executive's Directorate and corporate-wide budgets, we will also look at the recommendations and conclusions from the other scrutiny committees, which are occurring tomorrow, Friday and Monday. Okay, back to you, Meryl and Jessica.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of final points that we've picked up, and one of them actually sort of relates to your point regarding deliverability and the red status. So Councillor Amanda Williams within the meeting raised concern about the removal of funding to the RNLI, quoting the £50,000 spent or paid for the golf tournament and encouraging people to come to Porthcawl. There is a recommendation from BREP currently in relation to that, that's COM 5, which is that the budget reduction proposal of £38,000 by removal of support to RNLI for lifeguards at Porthcawl beaches that discussions be held with Porthcawl Town Council regarding potential funding and consideration also be given to decreasing the proposed budget reduction. The committee will recall that there was also mentioned that there are discussions going on with Treco Bay, so whether the committee wanted to include that within the recommendation or make a fresh or amended one.
Thank you, Jessica. Councillor Williams, I assume you'd like to lead off on this one?
Yeah, I agree with that recommendation, because throughout this we've talked about public perception and we've talked about communication and understanding, and I was told one's from revenue, one's an ongoing cost, one was a capital, but the public don't see that. They see 50,000 being given here and 51,000 being taken away here, and so I think we also need to, with that, make sure that we're communicating our decisions and making sure it's clear for the public, because this one particularly, I think, could appear to be very contentious.
Okay, I'm content with that. Is there any dissension? Can't see anybody. Is anyone there? I think we've all come to the end of our tether now, have we? Back to Jessica and Marilyn.
Nothing else we've picked up. The only other point, Chair, that we have picked up, unless members obviously come in with anything further, was Councillor Amanda Williams raised some questions with regards to the occupation of Ravenscourt and Civic, and it did receive some responses, and I think a commitment was forthcoming that the matter of occupation of both buildings would remain under review to identify whether there could be additional income or future savings, just whether the committee wanted to make a recommendation that is kept under review.
Who made that recommendation? Sorry, Jess.
That was Councillor Amanda Williams raised that point, Chair.
Amanda, would you like to add anything?
No, I think, I think we need to keep this on the agenda to keep an eye on as one of our things we're looking at, and obviously whether they could be merged, because if we're paying out for two buildings, two lots of heating and everything, we need to keep that in mind and look at potential other options as well outside of that, whether we've got a large building, okay, these teams, we don't know why these teams didn't suit Civic, but is there a different alternative, a cheaper alternative again? So looking at other options as well as just simply reducing the amount of space we are using in Ravenscourt, or merging the two, to whether there's other options as well.
Okay, thanks very much. Marilyn, Jessica, is there anything else which you've picked out?
Nothing that we've picked up, Chair, unless the committee want to raise anything now.
Okay, do any other members have any issues they'd like to raise? Just one thing from me, I guess. I haven't formulated it fully in my head, but I raised a series of issues, didn't I, relating to other council-wide services. So, for example, legal services and human resources and organisational development. And I suppose it would be remiss of me not to mention them again. And that is, we must be cognizant of the necessity to ensure that our, for example, legal services are not as lean as they are, to ensure that operational service delivery is not compromised. Now, we have a Care Inspectorate Wales report which has criticised Children's Social Services, for example, which no doubt Councillor Bledsoe will look at in more detail in her committee on social services. But it is of paramount importance that if we are going to meet some of the recommendations and conclusions from that report, that we have the legal team and the paralegals in place, rather than just agency staff, to ensure that some of those recommendations are actually met. So whilst it may be the case that they are not entirely visible to the public, they have a crucial role in actually ensuring that services are improved. So I would like Cabinet to be mindful of that when considering their budget proposals in this area. Also, excuse me, also with regards to human resources and organisational development, we know from previous discussions that this is a major corporate risk, so it would be remiss not to mention this. Kelly Watson, our monitoring officer, who has responsibility for HR, mentioned recruitment, retention, well-being and sickness levels. I was pleased with the response with regards to the way in which the organisation treats its staff and is endeavouring to ensure that its well-being and sickness levels are minimised and well-being is improved amongst our staff. But of course, recruitment and retention within key posts and key service delivery areas is imperative, and we mustn't rely on agency staff. Of course, this is going to potentially add financial pressures in some service areas, because inevitably that would increase our pay levels. But nevertheless, it's something which ought to be considered by Cabinet when it finalises its budget proposals. I think that pretty much summarises what I had, Meryl and Jessica. But unless any other members have anything, yeah, Meryl would like to come in, so I'll pass on to Meryl.
I was just going to ask, Chair, if there were any specific recommendations about the budget pressures and the budget reduction proposals within this remit of this committee. So that would be CEX1, housing and homelessness accommodation, the £700,000. I think there was discussion about sufficiency, wasn't it? Given the rising number of individuals and families presenting, and in view of current cost of living pressures. So if there was a specific comment on that pressure, just checking.
Yeah, I'm just trying to dig them out, Meryl, in all of my documents here. Here they are. So if we look at Appendix A, then.
Councillor Williams.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Amanda Williams.
When I raised my question about Ukrainians, I think it was the missed what I was getting at, and my concern was about the homeless. Some people have left after 6 months. I know the payment has been extended to 12 months. People are nearing the end of the 12 months. Some of them will have broken down. I know a number of individuals who've been hosting Ukrainians who they have left, and they've all had to, in order to get on, because there's a lack of social housing, they've all had to be made homeless to get this accommodation. And so I think that 700,000 is quite lean, considering we are now having to house other people, refugees as well. And that's where I was asking, are we getting any specific grants for this, or is the grant from Welsh Government simply to cover just general homelessness? Because we're seeing, particularly if you've got a number of refugees coming in, I don't know what the figure is now for the borough, but that could seriously impact on how much we're spending out on homelessness and emergency accommodation. And I wondered if we could have some clarity as well on whether we can go back to the Welsh Government, because it's great that they're paying the £350 a month for hosts, but when they move, is there a way that 350 could be paid to the local authority so that we can pay towards this emergency accommodation, because otherwise we're going to be hit with further bills that we weren't anticipating.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Williams. Was that, you capture all that, Meryl and Jessica? Just, yeah, so just referring to Appendix A then. The Chief Executive was brutally honest, I suppose, wasn't he? That was his best estimate. So I suppose, given the fact that the budget is a fluid document, it can be revised during the course of the year. I don't suppose that we can make any recommendation on that. It is his best guess. We don't know what it's a demand-led service, so we don't know what the pressures will be in that area. Although, judging by previous years, there's been an exponential increase, hasn't there, from 60,000 to 395,000. So, potentially it could be not enough to ensure that the legislative commitment from Welsh Government of eliminating homelessness is achieved. But I suppose we don't know because it's demand-led, so it's very difficult to provide a meaningful recommendation on that. On CW1, council-wide, I assume that the increase in the fire service precept is beyond our control. It is a precept set by the fire service, so there's very little we can do in terms of commenting on that budget pressure. And I think we've already tackled the council-wide emerging pressures of £1 million, and that was, I think, we had a satisfactory answer, didn't we, from Caris and Deb on that, I believe. So unless anyone else has any comments on Appendix A, we'll move to Appendix B. Please indicate if you do have any other comments. So just comments on the budget reductions then. £40,000, which is amber in 23-24 for the print strategy area. I think Martin Morgan's provided a satisfactory answer on this, wasn't it? It's about printers, I think. Didn't you mention printers and printing? I'm not entirely sure whether there's anything meaningful that we can recommend there. I was suggesting that perhaps we front load the budget reduction, and I questioned why it was amber, but I think he gave a satisfactory answer, to be honest with you, unless anyone else has any comments on that. And with regard, Councillor Granville.
Chair, can I just give you my apologies? I got to go to another a meeting, and I have not nothing to eat, so I got to leave you and grab a quick sandwich before I go to this next meeting.
Sure,
but a
no
very
problem.
interesting meeting. Good meeting, Chair.
Good. Thanks for your attendance, Councillor Granville. Have a good sandwich.
Thank you.
Take care. Right. And then on the CEX2, everybody, the efficiency saving target, this is a green target anyway, and it's of a relatively little sum. So I don't suppose any recommendation could possibly come out of that particular item. Of course, I questioned the Chief Executive on, because the recommendations and the pressures were limited in the documents which we received with specific regard to his directorate and the council-wide pressures, I asked whether any further reductions were considered. And of course, he did mention within the meeting that a large proportion of his directorate is staff-related. And of course, that was acknowledged by the committee. I don't believe there was any dissension in that, and it was very difficult, I believe, for him to manage any service pressures or identify any meaningful budget reduction proposals within his directorate without it having an impact on staff and therefore operational service delivery in other directorates. So I believe I was satisfied with that response, but if other members would like to intervene, please indicate if you wish to do so. And as far as I'm concerned, Meryl and Jessica, that is it from me. But if you have anything else to add? No. Do any members have anything else to add?
No, thanks.
No, okay, right. I would just like to update members on the Public Service Board before you all leave us. Following the merger of Cwm Taf Public Service Board and Bridgen's Public Service Board last year, the PSB, as it's called, Public Service Board, have now drafted their new wellbeing plan, which is currently out to consultation. Rather than re-establish Bridgen's PSB panel at this time to consider the plan, given that we're in the process of discussions around potential joint scrutiny with RCT and Merthyr of the session scheduled for the 30th of January 2023. The session will cover what the PSB is, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, as well as then going through the draft PSB Wellbeing Plan. And this is an opportunity for members to ask questions and provide any views or comments on the draft plan before it is finalised and approved. Therefore, as the Scrutiny Committee with the responsibility for scrutinising the PSB, I would like to strongly encourage all of our members on the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee to attend this session on the 30th January if you're available. in order that the Scrutiny Committee can fulfil its duty appropriately. And this session will be appearing in your diaries very shortly. So I hope that's all clear, unless anyone has any questions. I will move to item 5 on our agenda, and that is urgent items. There are no urgent items of business in respect of which notice has been given in accordance with Part 4, Paragraph 4 of the Council Procedure Rules. And I wish everyone a happy afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you on a future date. Thank you very much indeed for your contributions.
Thanks very much, Chair.
Thanks, Alex. Bye.
Bye-bye.